Happy Thursday, mathematicians. Today for Math Workshop, you're going to need your math notebook, glue stick, highlighters, and a pencil, your Envisions workbook, page 65 and 66. You will be skipping some of the lessons in the workbook that we will be revisiting later and putting together. So today it's going to say 5-5, use partial quotients to divide. Then take your blue math resource folder that's located inside your anchor binder, open it up, and on the left side you're going to find the teach pages that say partial quotient. Show the separate parts of the answer to a division problem is your first one. And then the second one is going to have an example at the top that says break apart 69 using place value, use the distributive property. So you're going to need to get both of these teach pages out, then keep the rest of them in your folder, close your folder, keeping it inside of your anchor binder, and then place back in your basket for today. Then go ahead back to your notebook. We are still in our 5th unit on division. Throughout this division chapter, we have been learning how to estimate to find the quotients. We have used our zeros trick and basic facts to find quotients. And today we're learning a very important strategy that you need to learn this year because you're going to continue to use it into 5th grade and on, which is called partial quotients. So we're going to go ahead and number our pages. So we're on page 66 and 67. We're going to turn back to the table of contents. And we're going to insert number 66. We're going to call this partial quotients. Remember, at any point in the video, you can pause to get caught up and organize, and then you can push play to continue. Today's date is 10-15-20. Then go ahead and turn back to page 66. Remember, before we start today's lesson, you should have looked at your classwork page from yesterday. That was the page that you completed from your workbook that was on page 59 and 60. You should have looked at the answer key to review. Some of you, when you had turned in your classwork the first time, had just written answers as if you were just dividing. You have to make sure that the work shown on the classwork is the standard or the lesson that was taught. So for each one of your division problems, you are told to either use rounding and showing your work how you rounded before you divide, or using compatible numbers, which also needs to be shown before you show your division. So remember, you have been asked to always show your work, because in math, that's the way that I'm going to be able to tell if you're indeed learning the new content or if you're just finding the answers with a helper. All right, we're going to go ahead and glue in our teach page on the left. This is the one that says 5-5. Use your glue stick. Go ahead and make the frame on the outside. Crisscross it through the middle and smooth it out. Then the page that's going to be your practice page. Crisscross and smooth it out as well. Remember, if you glued on top of your numbers, go ahead and just rewrite them so they're nice and clear and visible. The next thing we're going to do is going to write the title for our lesson. So at the top, you're going to write partial. This is right on where the paper is meeting, so it's a little challenging. Partial quotient. And then use your highlighter to make your highlighting box around the title so we can remember what the focus of today's lesson is. So in our previous chapters, we have learned how to use partial product, because we know product is the answer for a multiplication question. Well, now that we're in division, we're going to use partial quotient. So we're going to break apart our problems into different parts or puzzle pieces to come up with the final answer, which is going to be the quotient. So we're going to start by looking at that vocabulary. So highlight the words partial quotients, show the separate parts, we're going to underline, of the answer to a division problem. The sum of the partial quotients is the quotient. So we're going to, once again, once we find those puzzle pieces or the smaller answers, in the end, we're going to add them back up to find the final quotient or the final answer. So when we look at the example that is provided to us, we can see that there is the problem set up. We call this our tabletop division symbol, and that just shows us how to set up a division problem. So when we look at the number 85, we're going to just make sure we understand what these different numbers represent. This is the dividend. We said the dividend is the original number, or how many of an item we have. So we can even refer to the number underneath as, let's say, 85 M&Ms. My kids all love M&Ms. So we can say we're starting with 85 M&Ms, which is the dividend. The outside, or to the left of the dividend, we call that the divisor. So the divisor is what we're going to be referring to as how many groups we're dividing the M&Ms into. So if I have 85 M&Ms and I'm trying to divide it into 5 groups, or to give them to 5 different people, my job is to then figure out how many M&Ms do the 5 people get. So I have a big pile of 85 M&Ms and I'm going to try to give it to 5 different individuals. So we're going to use partial quotient today to figure out how many each of those 5 people will get. So when we look at our problem, we see that we have the dividend, and then we have the number to the side. So we're going to try to figure out how we can use groups to figure out the amount. So when we look at this, we're gonna say, well, if there's 5 groups, and I'm always going to start with the bigger digit of the dividend. So I know that's in the tens place, so I'm going to look to say, can I make 5 groups of 10? So 5 groups of 10 would give me the number of 50. Well, I can definitely take away 50 M&Ms from 85, and that is the first, what we call partial quotient, because we're taking away a grouping of 10. Then we are subtracting to find the difference to determine how many more groups can I make of 5 out of what was remaining, which is the 35. So we can then say, well, 5, 35, if I look at that in reverse, 5 groups of what missing basic fact. So then I can sing my 5 song to say 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. There's 7 in that song, so I can say there's 7 more that I can do, which the 7 is placed on the top to be the second partial quotient. Then I can say, well, 5 times 7 is 35. So I'm taking 35 away, which leaves me with 0 M&Ms left over. The 2 numbers on the top are what we refer to as the partial quotient. So we can then say, well, my partial quotients are 10 and 7, which then I can add back together because the sum is adding 10 plus 7 to give me the final quotient of 17. So we're going to talk about how to solve this in more detail. That was a quick example that they provided. So when we look at number 2, it says to use partial quotients to find 70 divided by 5. So remember, the number that comes first is what we consider to be the dividend, or how many M&Ms we might have. The second number is the divisor, or how many groups we're dividing the M&Ms into. So the first number is how many M&Ms we have all together. The second number is how many groups we're dividing the M&Ms into. So we're going to learn how to use partial quotients. We always want to start by estimating, because estimating gives us an idea of where the answer should be close to. So we're going to highlight the word estimate. And then it says how many 5s are in 7. So we're going to try to see if we can figure out how many 5s are in 5 is in 70. So we start by saying, well, if I think of 10 groups of 5, 10 times 5 is the answer of 50. Then I can subtract that. So I can say, well, 5 goes into 70 by saying there was 5 groups of 10. 5 groups of 10, which we then move up to the top to say this is the first partial quotient. So we just found 5 times 10 is 50. We then want to subtract 70 minus 50 to show the difference of 20 M&Ms still that's not in a group. Well, then we go to the next question, how many 5s are in the 20 left over? So this is where we can use our basic fact. So then we skip count by 5s. 5, 10, 15, 20. So we can say there's 4 groups of 5. So we can say there's 5 times 4. 5 times 4 is 20 exactly. So we're taking away what we just created. So we had 20. We're taking away the 20 that we just created to be left with 0. The 4 groups that we just created needs to go on the top to be the second partial quotient. The partial quotients then need to be recorded, 10 and 4. Add the partial quotients to find the quotient. So remember, then the last step is to then add these together. And our final quotient is the number 14. We can then plug in the final quotient to the original problem. Moving down to the next problem, it says to use partial quotients to find 80 divided by 5. So we start by setting up the tabletop division problem. So the first number is the dividend, and we said this is the number that goes underneath, and we always refer to the dividend as how many M&Ms I have all together. The second number we said is called the divisor, and that's how many groups of M&Ms I'm creating. So the number 80 is how many M&Ms I have. The outside the divisor is how many groups I'm making. So I always start by saying, how many groups of 5 can I get into the number 80? So I start with the greatest place value and try to determine if I multiply 5 times the place value, which the place value is the tens, 5 times 10 gives me the answer of 50. So I was able to use that place value tens, which I then move up to be my first partial quotient. I then need to subtract 80 minus 50, leaves me the difference of 30. Well, now once again, I have to decide, can I make 5 groups go into the number 30? So then I can look at basic facts. So 5 times what missing number? So I can skip count. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. I was able to say it 6 times. So 5 times 6 is 30. This missing factor is going to move up to be a partial quotient. And then I need to subtract to find if I have any left over. 30 minus 30 leaves me the difference of 0, which means I have nothing else to divide into. My final quotient needs to be the addition of both partial quotients. So I have 6 plus 10 is the number 16. And then we can move that 16 to be my quotient to the original problem. Looking at the next example, we have use partial quotient to find 92 divided by 4. Remember, the first number is the dividend, and that's how many M&Ms you have. It goes underneath the division symbol. The next number is our divisor, and that's how many groups we're making. So the first thing you want to do when you're given a division problem that is horizontal, so that is side by side, you want to rewrite it with the tabletop division symbol. When you start and they're not providing the blanks to write in, you want to start by looking at, if I make 4 groups of the greatest place value, will that work to take away using subtraction? So it's in the tens place, so I can multiply 4 times 10, and then we say that is equivalent to 40. I then use that 10 to be placed at the top to be my first partial quotient. The next step is to subtract to figure out how much I have left. So 2 minus 0 is 2. 9 minus 4 is 5. When I look at my number I'm left with, I know that this isn't a basic fact of the divisor 4. So I then look to see, well, can I still take another group of 10 out because this number is a 2-digit number? So that's in the tens place. So I'm going to try to take out more groups of 10. So we said 4 always gets written first, times the place value. 4 times 10 is 40 again. That 10 is then rewritten again as another partial quotient, so it's not the same one, it's a second one. I subtract to find the difference. 2 minus 0 is 2. 5 minus 4 is 1. And I'm left with the number 12. Well, I know that this is going to probably be a basic fact. So once again, I take the divisor and I say, well, if I have 4 groups of what missing factor to give me 12. So 4 times we can say 3, because you could have skipped count by 4s to say 4, 8, 12. We said that is 12 to find that there is nothing left over. That 3 is placed as your last partial quotient. You then have to add those partial quotients to find your final answer. So 3 plus 10 gives me the total of 23, which is then going to be your final quotient. Moving to the right side, we have the first problem at the top. It says, break apart the number 69 using place value. Use the distributive property to show 69 divided by 3. So when you look at that, it says to break it apart. So it's telling us exactly what to do, the number 69. So we know that we split apart by place value to say there's a 6 in the tens place to show 60, and there's a 9 in the ones place. So when we look at this break apart value, we can then use our understanding of compatible numbers with our divisor. So we're going to highlight where it says distributive property, because this is the property or the method they want us to use. So when we look at this, we can start with rewriting the problem. 69 divided by 3. We can see that we pulled apart two place values, 60 plus 9 divided by 3, which means that we're going to divide 3 into 60, which is the first problem, and then 3 into 9, which is the second problem. So when we look at 60 divided by 3, we then see that the quotient is going to be 20. 9 divided by 3 will give us the quotient of 3. These are considered to be our partial quotients. So we're going to just remind ourselves that these are partial quotients. And then in the end, we always add those partial quotients back together to find the final quotient. So that is the answer to the original problem. They've shown us a visual of how they could have separated that. So we had the 3 groups on the side, and then at the top it would have been 60 plus 9 to show us how that works. All right, now looking at the example, we said that this says, Harry used the model below to find 84 divided by 4. Use the distributive property to show why Harry's strategy works. So when we look at this, we have to determine what this problem represents. So we're going to take the original, pull it to the side, and we're going to then use the same strategy we used above. So we're taking the dividend and actually going to rewrite it by showing that this is 8 tens, so that's an 80, plus 4 ones. So we're going to write that as 80 plus 4 as my first number pulled apart, divided by the same divisor as the original problem. We then are going to use distributive property, which means we're going to make 2 separate problems. So the first problem is going to have the 80 still be the dividend, divided by the same divisor, plus the second problem, the 4 is still the dividend, divided by the original divisor. When we use this, we can use our strategy of our basic facts and zeros trick. So take the 0, put it in the answer. 8 divided by 4 gives me 2, which is 20, plus the second problem, 4 divided by 4 is 1. These are my partial quotients, and then 20 plus 1 gives me the combined quotient of 21. When we look at the model, we can see the two partial quotients represented above. 20 plus 1 is the quotient of 21. When we look down at the practice section, it says show how to use the distributive property. So this is the same thing that we've been doing the two problems over here, to divide the number of 54 by 2. By is another word for division. So this is meaning division. By breaking apart the dividend of 54 into the numbers 40 plus 14. So if we know that the original number is 54, the original divisor is 2, but they're telling us exactly what to use for our broken apart values. So we're going to replace the 54 with the numbers 40 plus 14, because if we combine those two, it still equals 54, and using the divisor of 2. Because we're using the distributive property, each one of the numbers that we broke apart have to be a separate problem. So we can even go ahead and set up our two problems. So the 40 goes in the first problem, the 14 goes in the second problem. The divide by 2, so the divisor has to be placed in both problems. You can then divide using the zeros trick and basic facts. So the 0 goes down. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So my first partial quotient is 20. The second one is 14 divided by 2. Basic fact tells me it's 7. I show that I have to then add the two partial quotients. 20 plus 7 gives me the total of 27 to be my final quotient. The next one says a chef is baking cookies for 3 parties. For each party, the chef uses the same number of eggs. So this is the same thing as saying each. She has 2 dozen. We have to remember that dozen means 12. What is the greatest number of eggs the chef can use for each party? So when we know that dozen means 12, that tells us there is multiple things that we need to figure out. So the divisor is going to be represented by the 3 parties. So when we look at it, 2 dozen, we need to know, well, what does that actually equal? So 2 dozen, we are going to multiply 12 times 2, because 2 times 12 equals 24, and that is how many eggs we're going to look at first. We then are going to divide that into 3 parties of having the same amount of eggs. So we say there's 24 eggs divided by 3 parties. We can then use our basic fact to say 24 divided by 3 is the same thing as saying 3 times what number equals 24. So 3, you can sing your multiples songs. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 28. So you would have sang your multiples 8 times, which tells me that the missing quotient is 8, and we label it to say each party has 8 eggs. When you write your reflection today, you can focus on using your partial quotients or using the distributive property of dividing your dividend into either compatible numbers or into the actual values of the place values. When you're done, make sure you submit a picture of your completed pages and your reflection. You also will have your workbook page. So at the top of page 65, remember this is topic 5-5. This is your first part of your classwork. So you are going to be completing the even numbers. So even numbers, but you have to show all your work. So do not submit a picture of your classwork if there's just answers. That's not what I asked for. So you're solving for numbers 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. And then when you flip to the back, you're going to solve number 14, 16, and 18. So you have 4 pictures to submit today, the 2 in your notebook and both sides of your classwork.